Now we had enough rain. We have fresh water enough. And it's a flowery season around. So we have everything for a happy living. Now it's our duty to utilize it in proper proportions. Not overdoing and, of course, not underdoing. Pleasure throughout the life is yours. Welcome once again to News Analysis. News Analysis, a weekly magazine on current affairs. To begin with the main points in a nutshell. White House weighs limits of terror fight. 5 central banks move to supply cash to Europe. Top medal for a US Marine who saved many lives. Libya conflict, NTC forces attack Sirte and Bani Walid. Sonia Gandhi back at work after surgery abroad. Pakistan floods, Prime Minister Gilani cancels trip to the US. Now the news in detail. White House weighs limits of terror fight. The Obama administration's legal team is split over how much latitude the United States has to kill Islamist militants in Yemen and Somalia, a question that could define the limits of the war against Al-Qaeda and its allies, according to administration and congressional officials. The debate, according to officials familiar with the deliberations, centers on whether the United States may take aim at only a handful of high-level leaders of militant groups who are personally linked to plots to attack United States, whether it may also attack thousands of low-level foot soldiers focused on parochial concerns, controlling the essentially ungoverned lands near the Gulf of Aden, which separates the countries. The dispute over limits of the use of lethal force in the region, whether from drone strikes, cruise missiles, or commando raids, have divided the State Department and the Pentagon for months, although to date it remains a merely theoretical disagreement. Current administration policy is to attack the only high-value individuals in the region, as it has tried to do about a dozen times. But the unresolved question is whether the administration can escalate attacks, if it wants to, against rank-and-file members of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula based in Yemen and the Somalia-based Shabab. The answer could lay the groundwork for a shift in the fight against terrorists, as original Al-Qaeda operating out of Afghanistan and Pakistan grows weaker. One senior official played down the disagreement on Thursday, characterizing it as a difference in policy emphasis, not legal views. Defense Department lawyers are trying to maintain maximum theoretical flexibility, while State Department lawyers are trying to reach out to European allies who think that there is no armed conflict for legal purposes outside of Afghanistan and that the United States has right to take action elsewhere only in self-defense, the officials said. But other officials insisted that the administration lawyer disagreed on the underlying legal authority of the United States to carry out such strikes. Robert Chesney, a law professor at the University of Texas at Austin, who specializes in the law of war, said the dispute reflected widespread disagreement about how to apply rules written for traditional wars to a conflict against splinter network of terrorists, and fears that it could lead to an unending, constrained global war.
We know that Al-Qaeda is actively planning to attack us again. We know that this threat will be with us for a long time, and that we must use all elements of our power to defeat it. But I believe with every fiber of my being that in the long run, we also cannot keep this country safe unless we enlist the power of our most fundamental values. The documents that we hold in this very hall, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, these are not simply words written into aging parchment. They are the foundation of liberty and justice in this country. I've studied the Constitution as a student. I've taught it as a teacher. I've been bound by it as a lawyer and a legislator. I took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution as Commander-in-Chief. And as a citizen, I know that we must never, ever turn our back on its enduring principles for expedience sake. We're going to exhaust every avenue that we have to prosecute those at Guantanamo who pose a danger to our country. But even when this process is complete, there may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes. In some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States. In our constitutional system, prolonged detention should not be the decision of any one man. If and when we determine that the United States must hold individuals to keep them from carrying out an act of war, we will do so within a system that involves judicial and congressional oversight. I am not the only person in this city who swore an oath to uphold the Constitution.
5 central banks moved to supply cash to Europe. Worried that Europe's debt impasse has posed a growing threat to global financial system, the world's major central banks moved Thursday to assure that European banks would not run short of cash as troubled nations like Greece and Italy sought to stabilize their economies. Thursday's action coming almost exactly 3 years after the collapse of the investment bank Lehman Brothers lifted global stock markets, sharply increasing the value of sales in banks heavily exposed to debt from Greece and the other struggling members of the Eurozone. The euro, which had been falling in recent days, rebounded. The central bank action came as European finance ministers and other policy makers were gathering in Wrocław, Poland for meeting on Friday and Saturday. The United States Treasury Secretary Timothy F. Geithner, who was scheduled to attend, was expected to urge European officials to act more aggressively to contain the sovereign debt crisis, which has already begun to undercut growth in Europe. While the move will relieve some pressure on troubled banks, it does not address the underlying problems that made it difficult for banks to borrow dollars on their own. The central banks seem determined to demonstrate they would not hesitate to deploy their combined weight to keep the crisis from leading to a collapse of the Eurozone. Top medal for U.S. Marine who saved many lives. President Obama awarded the Medal of Honor on Thursday to a young former Marine who ignored orders to stay put and fought his way 5 times into an ambush in an Afghan ravine, helping to rescue 36 comrades and to recover the remains of 4 dead American servicemen. In a ceremony at the White House, the president draped the medal over a Dakota mayor, describing him as a humble young man who repeatedly placed himself in the extraordinary danger to save men regarded as his brothers. Today we pay tribute to an American who placed himself in the thick of fight again and again and again, the president said. Mr. Mayor was the first living recipient from the Marine Corps to receive the award, the nation's highest award for valor for actions during the wars in Afghanistan or Iraq. It may be a platform for representation of the guys who are out of there fighting every day, he said in a telephone interview before the award ceremony. My story is one of millions and others aren't often told. He added, you get the medal and you start growing about life. Mr. Mayor, 23, now a sergeant in the inactive reserve, was an infantry corporal on September 8, 2009, when an Afghan and American column headed before dawn toward the village Ganjigal in Kunar province. The men in column, a mix of Afghan soldiers, brother police officers, and American trainers, were to meet with local elders, but they had been betrayed and walked into an ambush. Corporal Mayer and another Marine had been assigned to secure a flank, and as the Taliban gunfire began, the rest of his team was trapped. He was several hundred yards away. Corporal Mayer listened on the radio as the rest of his Marine training team tried calling for help. And as Captain Will Swenson of the Army, who worked with border police and was also trapped, shouted into his radio for artillery support to suppress the Taliban fighters. Investigation later suggested the Army officer decided that because the trapped troops were unaware of the precise locations of all the other troops on the operation, artillery fire might have endangered them and was best withheld. Corporal Mayer asked permission several times to go into the ravine and to fire. He was told remain in place, but decided to rush to the village nonetheless. Officers at the nearby army headquarters denied the request for artillery support, leaving the men, many of them wounded, to fight on their own until helicopter gunships arrived. In the course of 6 hours, survivors said Corporal Mayer and his driver, Staff Sergeant Juan Rodriguez Chavez, led 5 fights into ravine toward Ganjigal. 4 times they helped recover wounded men, first Afghans, and were pinned down to later Americans similarly trapped. Libya conflict, NTC forces attack Sirte and Bani Walid. Columns of anti-Gaddafi forces have renewed assaults on Sirte and Bani Walid, 2 of the final strongholds of the ousted Libyan leader Muhammad al-Gaddafi. Gunfire and explosions have been heard around Bani Walid's hills and valleys 180 kilometers south of Tripoli as hundreds of fighters move on to town. Trucks and tanks also approaching Sirte hours after an advance was forced back by Gaddafi loyalists. Meanwhile, Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan is visiting Libya's capital. He has met the country's new rulers in Tripoli as he continues a regional tour asserting Ankara's regional influence. His visit comes a day after UK Prime Minister David Cameron and French President Nicolas Sarkozy became the first foreign leaders to visit since Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was ousted. Libyan interim leader Mustafa Abdul Jalil is to meet US President Barack Obama during the UN General Assembly meeting in New York on Tuesday. AFP news agency quoted the White House as saying. Reporters in Tripoli says the latest attack suggests the battle for remaining contested areas of Libya could be entering a decisive phase. The concern is growing over the tens of thousands of civilians still believed to be living in both cities and who have been surviving for weeks with limited access to the food, water, and electricity, our correspondents added. Fighters loyal to the country's interim authorities, the National Transitional Council (NTC), have already seized a valley leading into Bani Walid following their push on Friday, Reuters news agency reported. An unnamed NTC commander told BBC fighters were making their way into Bani Walid. "We are planning to hold Friday prayers, God willing, in Bani Walid," he said. Fighters loyal to the country's interim authorities, the National Transition Council (NTC), have already seized a valley leading into Bani Walid following their push on Friday, Reuters news agency reported.